Continuing on the theme of the particle zoo, because there are loads of stuff, and it actually represents, I think, very clearly the obsession with mathematics in favor of reality and rationality. If we look at this in part 2, I tried to show you that the particle zoo may be nothing more than the fragments of a single entity, the photons. We fill things up with photons and then smash them into a brick wall, and we get fragments all over the place, and we think we've discovered new particles, when in reality it's just fragments of the same thing. So we look for ghosts with unreal mathematics, we predict them, and of course there's relentless drive, and it pays us with Nobel Prizes to find these things, and we seem to be finding them, literally dozens of them and hundreds of them, if not more. Now let's look at the absurdity of the concept of antimatter and positrons. What is the origin of this nonsense? Well, the origin is yet again blind mathematics, or what even is quite irrational mathematics, simply because, as you will see, just because an equation throws it, we don't normally accept the irrational answers, but in this particular case we seem to have accepted it, found some ghosts or predicted ghosts, and then set about finding them. So Dirac was the guy who came up with this idea, looking at Einstein's equation of E equals mc squared. To be true to mathematical convention, this equation should read E equals plus or minus mc squared, which means that you get plus energy levels and negative energy levels. Dirac thinks that mathematics is a perfect engine of truth. It's not a human convention, it's not made by us. Whatever it throws out, it must be true. So he interprets this result as meaning that there are hidden negative energy levels which must also exist, but they must be full. Why? I have no idea. Anywhere else in science, when such results are obtained from the square root of an equation, common sense is used to discard the ridiculous non-existent negative events, but not, it seems, in quantum physics. If you applied an equation to your dairy farm and you got these results, you would rightly ignore the negative hidden cows in your herd, right? But not if you're a genius. If you look at this, the very first one was the Anderson cloud experiment, that because he was looking for it, guess what? He found it. And this is a photograph of roughly, if you look it up yourself, you'll see, of a photograph of what he did, an experiment that he set about. It's called the Anderson cloud chamber photograph. Basically, you have a particle of matter, whatever that may be. It doesn't really matter. It's just something that you want to knock an electron out of the atomic orbital. So you hit it with a very high energy photon, and you have a positive end of a magnetic field, and then you have a negative end of a magnetic field. And let's assume that this experiment was right, and it did knock an electron out of this particle. What would we expect? Obviously we'd expect this electron to go where the vacuum is. This is where it's sucking energy or electron, because it is the motion poor end of the magnetic field. If you remember, it's this bit here. Look at the arrows where it's going. So if an electron came, we'd expect that to be going to the positive end. Now what's happened to this particle? Because we hit it so violently and we did knock an electron out of it, it is now extremely electron hungry. And guess where there are surpluses of electrons? The motion rich end of the magnetic field. Here at the negative end we have electrons dripping out, literally. It is supersaturated with electrons. This particle is super hungry. Why is it not more reasonable to assume that it's the negative end of the magnetic field that donates an electron back to the system, and all the equilibrium has been restored, and we have basically seen an electron going the other way around, rather than assuming that it must be a positron because it's going to the negative field. Because you're expecting it, because you want to expect it, you want to see it, then this photograph is being interpreted as a positron comes out, which, by the way, in every way, the mass, which also is, by the way, non-existent, but anyway, the mass of it and every other characteristic of this particle is identical to an electron, except that it goes to the negative end. But why is it going to the negative end? Why could it not be going from the negative to the positive end, which is the most likely event? Because here we have the richest electron richest part, and here we have the electron poor part. We have just knocked out the instability, if you like, and the equilibrium must be restored, and it's going the other way around. What could be happening really is, as I just described it to you, a magnetic field is not a neutral environment. A magnetic field is a wet place where electrons are like horses, photons running through it, and that's why we see the induced mass. Again, this will come up a bit more in the next video. But the idea to assume that magnetic fields are inert, that do not get involved in experiments, is a terrible mistake, because they do. One of them is extremely motion poor, so if you put a motion rich environment in there, it will lose electrons to the vacuum, and the other one is like a pump. It pumps electrons out, and if there is a positive end or motion poor end, it will suck out electrons from the magnetic or the electric field. Positons are most likely electrons going the other way. There is no such thing, because we would have seen it at a macro level by now. We would have discovered loads of it. We'd probably have engines running on positrons like we do on electrons. But we have absolutely nothing. The only proof we have is lots of mathematical garbage and a few faulty experiments in which we interpret it as the way we want to interpret it. And once again, magnetic fields are not neutral. They're very wet environments. This in particular, you'll see why it affects the two-hole experiment, which is this famous quantum physics where they experiment where they try to tell us that the particles, photons or electrons, are in fact double things, and they're also very clever. They can tell we're looking at them and all sorts of nonsense. So anyway, like we said before, if you place an electron-hungry event near the magnetic field, especially the north side of it, where it's pouring out with electrons, and if we look at the stream, it looks to us like you could interpret it, because it's just a stream. It can be going one way or the other, but it suits us to see what we want to see, which are non-existent ghosts, because this is the thing that pays. Similarly, in the cloud chamber, that now they've done more advanced versions of this, that you apparently can see it in motion. What we're looking for is that the cloud atoms and molecules, if you like, in the cloud, act as a conduit, just like it here. If you have a motion build-up in the clouds, a charge build-up, for it to reach the Earth, it uses the gas that's between the two as a conduit, as it ionizes, to go in there. And so you see in this a similar event. So when you place what they call a source of positrons, emitting positrons, which are, by the way, what it really means is a very hungry, electron-hungry event at one end, and you have a negative end or motion positive end of an electromagnetic field. Guess what happens? Through the same gas molecule, you see an ionized path of electrons going the other way, but it's interpreted as meaning, no, actually positrons are going this way. So in very high probability, once again, because we're looking for ghosts, in this experiment we're seeing nothing but electrons going the other way. Here is another example of what we talked about, these quarks before, where they are basically mathematical ghosts, calculated based on very faulty assumptions to begin with. Because by now, if you followed these videos, and hopefully you've seen some of the problems, then it seems that physicists don't really understand the very basics, like the electron photon parity, and in fact that neutrons and protons are the same thing. So for them to keep going on calculating even more higher physics with these basic fundamental misconception and bad assumption is madness. So we have seen what photons are most probably. If you look at protons, if you look at the most logical interpretation from all of the evidence that we see is that a proton is a quantized force field. It is highest here, and as it goes out, it diminishes in strength, in exactly the same way that the center of gravity of any other lump of protons, which is essentially, if you followed the video before, everything in the universe is just a bigger hydrogen atom, and they're relative to one another. So if you look here, here's the sun. You believe that you are actually, there is space between you and the sun. Well, I'm afraid, well, and not only that, the mathematicians and physicists can calculate that space, the distance here. But what are you really calculating? Where do you think you are? You're sitting in the middle of the sun. In the same way that if you were an electron here at the ground state, and then further out there would be the excited states of electrons, everyone would accept that you're in the middle of a proton. You're in the force field of the proton. So here, because the sun is relative to us is a bigger lump of protons, we are slap bang in the middle of the sun. This is still the sun's lattice pressure, because if you look at it, where's Pluto? Pluto is still under the gravitational force of the sun and is 40 times roughly further away from the sun than the Earth is. So the actual sun itself, the lattice pressure of the sun, the gravity of the sun, extends way beyond us and Pluto probably. And not only that, there will be other stars where all of these will overlap, and then of course ultimately there's the black hole in the center of the Milky Way, whose gravity goes way beyond everything that is in around or in the orbit, which we call the Milky Way galaxy, and extends further out. So as you can see, the idea of space, or the idea that there is nothing, is a misconception. It is invented by our mind. Space is gravity. Our stress, as you can see, space is gravity. So we don't need to come up with something new like a fabric, a stretchy thing, all that nonsense that Einstein's come up with. He couldn't really see. I mean, I don't understand why you would miss that. You're sitting there bang right in the middle of the lattice pressure of the sun. So all of this stuff here, if we had quarks somehow here, now look at how big this proton is here. Where are the quarks? What's the evidence for it at this level? Why can't we find it? Because it is nothing but just a bigger hydrogen atom here. So why can't we see it? And the answer is, well, they don't exist, because then they're built on mathematical assumptions that are totally wrong. And but we like, quantum-like particles, so we're stuck with it. Antimatter does not exist. Why would it exist? It just doesn't make any sense. We create it because it rewards us. Carl Anderson won a Nobel Prize for this discovery, by the way. Guess what he would have won if he'd said, no, those are just electrons going the other way? Well, nothing. So there seems to be an enormous amount of pressure in having to find these things. You've seen this again. I don't mean to be rude, but I think it's rude. It is true. Every time we find a particle in the quantum bowl, we get Nobel Prizes thrown at it, and everybody becomes a genius. So, and the discipline even more and more intimidating, elitist, and territorial until nobody can talk about it. And that's why it's just gone at a tangent somewhere where religious text now makes much more sense than this nonsense. And there are, of course, many, many more ghosts invented, and many Nobel Prizes waiting to be discovered until they find, proof of gravitons and muons and gnuons, all kinds of nonsense, literally hundreds of them. But I'll leave it to you to ponder how you could build anything from such complexity. But maybe you like complexity too. Anyway, conclusion. When we do not know, if you think about it, if we don't even know the basics yet, that electrons and photons are the same thing, when we do not know that neutrons are just modified hydrogen atoms in the nuclei, how they're created by gravity, and so on, when we don't know what gravity is, when we don't know what mass really is, and we don't even know that space does not exist, because we're looking at the problem and yet we still prefer space rather than gravity. We are in the middle of the sun, we're sitting in it, and yet we make this thing up because we need to make it up for our survival. And of course time is just periodicity. The movement of the Earth around the sun has absolutely nothing to do with the rotation and vibration of atoms in a clock. Why would you even relate it? It would be related because it serves our purposes for calculating things that affects our survival, but they're entirely man-made concepts. They do not exist. And so if we don't know these basics, we really shouldn't be talking about much beyond that and creating all this other amazing complexity and the particle zoo, but we seem to have just missed that point. Anyway, if you need a systematic explanation of everything in this video, and all the other videos, then please get this book. It's available free of charge as a Kindle ebook. I don't want anything from it. It may just help you see it in slightly more organized fashion, and then you can follow it better, because these things are a little bit all over the place. I apologize, but the videos are there just to create a little bit of doubt in your mind, and make you see that these physicists are not as perfect geniuses as you think they are. There are lots and lots of problems, and my answers are not necessarily right. They're right for me, obviously, otherwise I'd have thought of better ones, but it just in case, it might inspire you to come up with the right answer once you see that these problems exist. Thanks.